So we go to the last speaker of this slot. This is Kim Davies from PTI. And Kim is going to talk about the root KSK protection and key ceremonies.
Thanks very much. As Roy mentioned, I'm going to give you an overview of the how we protect the KSK, and a big part of that is how we conduct KSK key ceremonies throughout the year. So I'm going to start off the presentation by giving you a short little video that might be illuminating, might not be.
We don't know how your group works. You guys don't exactly advertise your methods. Based on what we do know, it looks like the first step to taking over the internet. If that's what you think, then you understand very little. By all means, enlighten us. The internet is built on the premise that when people type in the address of a website, they are sent the legitimate version of that site. When the 7 of us would meet up, we would verify that every entry in the online phone book was legitimate. If we didn't, a bunch of fake sites would pop up to steal users' personal data, plant spyware on phones and computers. So 7 people verify every website on the internet? We use an algorithm to do it. What happens if someone gets their hands on that algorithm? Well, they couldn't. Not without these.
Danilo Lukic and Tate Orvis had those cards. What are they?
When the algorithm isn't in use, it's divided into 7 parts and stored on hard drives. The drives are kept in safes, locked with these. But even if someone snatched all of our cards, and whoever poisoned our lunch obviously didn't, they'd still need to clear a dozen hurdles before they could do any real harm. What do you mean? We're just the first line of defense. There are backup algorithms and then fail-safe alarms, replacement key holders. There isn't a scheme I could imagine that would actually benefit from my friends dying.
Okay. So that's probably what most people think of when they think of these key ceremonies. That's probably the most accurate fictionalized account that I've seen. There's been quite a few. So why don't we go through what actually happens? So as part of our root zone related functions, the INS services team, of which I'm a part, we manage the KSK, key signing key for the root zone. And I don't need to tell folks in the audience after all the presentations today, its role in DNSSEC. Reiterating what we heard earlier today, what really does make this special is its role as a trust anchor. Unlike other keys using the DNS, the fact that changing it is particularly difficult, and the fact that it's embedded in so many different places globally makes management of it a particularly unique challenge. So the way we manage it is we have key signing ceremonies, which is not unique to the root zone, but I think the way we do it is relatively unique. It's a very public process, which I'll walk you through now. Another important part is involvement of the community. So we use HSM's hardware security modules for actually storing private key data for the root key. Many of you are familiar with these devices. For those that aren't, HSMs are specialized devices designed for storing cryptographic keys. These in particular are designed to be tamper-proof. The idea is that if there's any attempt to open them or somehow otherwise extract keys from them, they will destroy their contents and make it unavailable. These are the highest rated FIPS level HSMs available, and this is at the heart of the operation. So we have a series of these, multiple redundancies, but the root key is stored in one of these devices. Now, these devices are operated by inserting a series of smart cards into them, and the way we've configured our operating HSMs is that 7 smart cards are created when we induct to the HSM, And then for future operations involving the HSM, you need 3 of 7 of those cards to be present. What we've then done is taken those 7 cards that were created when the HSM was commissioned and essentially distributed them amongst community members. We call these community members trusted community representatives. And so therefore, by distributing these cards, or a proxy for these cards, we require 3 of 7 of these trusted community representatives to be present whenever we want to turn on and use that HSM. So this HSM in its resting state is stored in a high security safe. These high security safes are locked with a combination, and this combination is known to another person called a safe security controller. A safe security controller is a small group of people. Their only role is simply to know the combinations to the safe. Without a safe security controller, you're unable to get into the safe to obtain access to the HSM. The safe, when it's not in use, is monitored with a variety of different sensors, seismic sensors and other kinds of monitoring equipment to ensure the safe is not opened surreptitiously. So the safes are stored in a specialized safe storage room that can only be accessed by 2 additional people. One is a ceremony administrator and the other is an internal witness. Both of these are ICANN staff members. And much like the safe, the room itself is also monitored with intrusion detection systems such as motion sensors. So those safes are stored in a larger room, which I don't think is quite visible on this slide, which is our ceremony room. These ceremony rooms are where we meet regularly every 3 months to perform key signing ceremonies, during which time we remove HSMs from the safe, we perform a ceremony, we activate them, we use them, and then return them back to their resting place. Every time we're in this room performing ceremonies, they're videotaped. We have third-party auditors in the room. We have community members in the room. So this is a place where we perform actions on the HSMs, but it's very transparent and very open as to how it's being done. Importantly, there's one additional control I wanted to mention, which is that none of these people can be in the room without an additional person called the Physical Access Control Manager, who is off-site granting access to the room. So we have 2 ceremony rooms. They're essentially exact duplicates of one another, one on the US West Coast and one on the US East Coast. And these are guarded 24/7. So those rooms I depicted earlier are essentially sitting in larger facilities, essentially co-location facilities. So ceremonies. Ceremonies are conducted 4 times a year. This is when we get the trusted community representatives I just mentioned and the other people that are required to be involved to come together to sign the zone signing keys that will be used in root zone operations. This process is streamed and recorded, so you can watch it in real time as it's happening. You can also watch it after the fact. All the materials associated with the ceremonies, both the videos but also software source codes, scripts, all the materials involved are posted online on our website. And the goal in us doing it in this particular fashion, where it's extremely transparent, extremely open, is really to engender trust in the process. Without knowledge that the KSK is being stored in a very secure way, security in DNSSEC overall is undermined. So our responsibility as stewards of the KSK is to ensure that you as a community are comfortable that it's being managed in an appropriate way, and a key part of that is being very transparent in our operations. So what do we do in an actual ceremony? So I mentioned the HSMs are within the safe normally. Throughout the process of a ceremony, we withdraw HSM from the safe, we withdraw other items from the safe required to operate the HSM, such as a laptop and so forth. We bring these all out onto to a desk, and then we essentially sign 3 months worth of ZSK signatures that VeriSign has provided in their role as the root zone maintainer. And then they use those in their day-to-day operations of publishing the root zone. What's critical about how we do these ceremonies is the chain of custody. We have a very elaborate script that's followed step by step, but really at the heart of how the script is conducted is making sure that all the materials that are used in key signing operations have a clear chain of custody from when they were first commissioned to when they're last used. So a lot of the security and protections involve making sure that in between ceremonies we can satisfy ourselves that none of the materials were used for other purposes, which would break that chain of trust, chain of custody. So the future for this process, current efforts are supporting the key rollover process that we've already discussed. We regularly enhance how we do the ceremonies. We evolve the ceremony procedures and also the security that we have at the facility based on the experience that we gain as we do these. We've now done 29 ceremonies. And the very first few, as we did them, we got a lot of feedback and we were constantly iterating. Now we're really at a stage of refinement. We get feedback after every one, but generally speaking, small adjustments are now being made. I think we've gotten the process relatively down pat in a way that makes those involved quite comfortable. We continue to monitor community feedback, and we also monitor security threats, whether it's physical security issues with the particular hardware or that we use or other elements involved. And then the most important thing I wanted to mention to you on this slide is something that I'm announcing now here today, which is that we're opening up for applications for new trusted community representatives. All the trusted community representatives involved in the process today were selected in 2010. Back then, we did an open call for volunteers prior to the root zone being signed. Those TCRs have served us very well, but some have retired and we've used some of our backups, and therefore the time is appropriate to start soliciting for new volunteers. So that is now something that's open, and I encourage you, if this sounds like something interesting that you'd like to be involved in, I encourage you to look at the details and to submit a statement of interest. So here's just some links to finish up. Firstly, the link to find out about the criteria and application process to be a TCR is iana.org/TCR. Generally, our DNSSEC resources are on the IANA website at iana.org/DNSSEC. I have a link to a key ceremony primer that might be of interest. I have a bunch of videos like the one I just showed you that I've been collecting that are on there as well. And I'm very happy to answer questions today, or if you have any further follow-up questions, please let me know. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Steve Crocker, I can. Two things. Now that you've got, 7 years of experience, certainly all the people who volunteered and participated in these ceremonies at the beginning were quite enthusiastic, and there was a lot of energy and so forth. Have you watched any fall off in terms of availability of people or interest or concerns about cost of participation, things like that?
So there's a couple of different issues to tease out of that. I think in terms of interest, I haven't seen it. I think the TCRs, to their credit, have been coming year in, year out, being actively involved in the process, and are just as engaged today as they were in the beginning. But there have been some changes to the dynamics. I mean, people change jobs, move on, so that's a factor. You mentioned travel. That has become an issue, and we've taken steps to address that. So the 2010 volunteers had to volunteer on the basis that they covered all of their own costs, including travel. So ICAM wasn't providing any travel support. We did a public consultation in 2014, and as a result of feedback, we adjusted that. So now that is something we do cover. So TCRs now get travel support, much like community travel support ICANN gives generally. And certainly for those that might have been interested in 2010 where travel was the roadblock, hopefully that now is alleviated.
Great. The other is a bit more technical. You'll recognize this because I bring it up from time to time. 3 out of 7 is your magic parameter, therefore. What is your experience with those numbers? Let's see. Let me say a bit more. Presumably, those numbers are intended to satisfy 2 competing constraints. One is to prevent collusion, so you don't want just one person to be able to operate things, although there's layers and layers of control, so it's not just like one person could walk in, but even so. So you want the number to be more than 1 out of n, and so you make it m out of n, and where m is some big enough. And the other is that you can't make it too big or you'll have absentees. Now, you probably have some statistics with respect to absenteeism. I don't imagine you have very much statistics with respect to collusion. So it might be hard to put feedback into the system to see whether or not those are properly chosen or optimally chosen parameters. What kind of consideration has there been about that design?
In terms of the numbers, the consideration we put into whether they're appropriately picked, I would say we haven't put a lot of thought into it because we just treat it as a constraint operationally. I would say that my experience has been that the numbers, in terms of getting enough people to attend ceremonies, is generally okay. We always try to have a minimum of 4 of 7 show up. We have had ceremonies where people have shown up and forgotten their key. That's happened a couple of times. And we've had some close calls with delayed flights and so forth. So, you know, it's always a little nervous before a ceremony begins if we don't see at least 3 people have shown up, and they might show up very, very last minute. So we try to manage that operationally to make sure we have some buffer there. Part of our TCR selection is we try to make sure that there's at least a couple of people in North America, so in a short, you know, we could fly someone in relatively quickly in a worst case scenario, that kind of thing. In terms of collusion, well, I think at least 3 of 7 could heck be in this room. I mean, a lot of them are from this community, so the notion that they're all separate would be a myth, but I haven't given much more thought than that to it.
Thank you.
Hi Kim, Jim Reed speaking for myself. I think it's an interesting thing that you're now opening up for a new round of trusted community representatives. But I wonder if you'd also thought about the idea of opening up another key repository that was outside the United States. I'm thinking for a number of reasons. First of all, there's the obvious practical logistical problems. Say, for example, if there's another natural disaster like that Icelandic volcano that shut down all transatlantic flights for a few days, if another incident like that, we could be screwed. And also, I think a problem for the community representatives could be it's now becoming much, much more unpleasant, and in some cases difficult for people to come into the United States. And that can be made even worse if this new travel ban on laptops comes in. So maybe it would be an idea to start thinking about trying to get a repository located some other country. I don't care where particularly, but somewhere outside the United States might be worth considering.
It's certainly a concept we consider quite regularly, in fact. You know, the original design of having 2 facilities both in the US is a constraint that was imposed from the previous IANA contract, which is now no longer applicable. So we certainly can consider this kind of notion. But there's a lot of variables to walk through.
Sure.
There's no clear right answer there, and you know, any additional facility is going to be a significant expense, both in terms of construction, but also in terms of staffing. We send something of the magnitude of 15 staff people to these ceremonies in order to execute them properly. So we need to think about locations not just from a one-time expenditure building them out, which is significant, but also how operationally that would fit in. And that's not to mention the security implications of having additional sites. There's more places that you need to then protect and so forth.
Yeah, well, it could be, for example, you just take away one of the US sites and stick it somewhere else. But it may be worthwhile when you're going through this exercise for the new trusted community representatives, maybe gather some information about people that would have considered volunteering but say, well, I'm not prepared to travel to the United States, or they found that a significant barrier to putting themselves forward. It might be useful to gather that information and add that to your considerations.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, John Dickinson. Just a quick question. You didn't say anything about HSM vendor selection, hardware renewal and destruction. I just wondered if you had any comments on those topics.
So the vendor selection, my understanding was that in 2010 when we commissioned these facilities, there was really only one vendor we could pick, which is AEP Networks, which is what we use today. I believe there's more options that we could consider now. In terms of the renewal cycle for HSMs, one of the challenges that we have is that the HSMs are powered by batteries that have a limited time span. So we try to manage to a lifetime of 5 years for the HSMs, which means that we actually replace them all across the period of about a year, roughly 18 months, 2 years ago. So all the HSMs that we use today were recently replaced, but we don't have any active plan to change the models of HSMs at this time. Our focus has just been on staggering their replacements so they don't all share the same fate in terms of battery life and so forth, but it is definitely an area for consideration.
Okay, thank you. Kim Davies? This concludes this third session. We will now have a break, and we need to be back here at 3:30, and that's about, I think, 26, 27 minutes from now. Thank you.